Hey guys, Anime Princess here, and welcome to my third iteration of the Spark Leaguestarter. For anyone new to the channel, don't worry, this video is all encompassing and it's going to make my previous Spark Leaguestart guides obsolete, so this is the place to be. The scope of this video will be to cover everything you need to know to have a solid first week of the league, including the leveling process. We're also going to be going over foundational knowledge so that you have a solid concept of how Spark functions. This build has gone through quite a few iterations for me over the past few leagues. As Spark has become more mainstream, we've seen pro players such as Exile and Garatha take the skill into hardcore racing leagues. This has been really exciting for me to watch, and I have taken a lot of their innovative ideas and used them as inspiration to make a stronger character in softcore trade. So now let's answer the big question, why should you league start Spark? Spark skill itself has pretty great numbers, which means it will carry you through the campaign and maps without having to rely on any specific unique item interactions. So we're able to use very basic rare gear drops. Secondly, the clear speed is fantastic. The spell is unique in that it can bounce off of walls, which means it will bounce back on enemies and hit them multiple times, and also through bouncing it just covers the screen very well. This means we can clear all the league mechanics very easily, even ones such as Legion, where more standard league start skills will tend to struggle. The third big reason, for me at least, is that Spark scales incredibly well with investment. It's a good league starter, particularly for players who want to carry a character through them for the entire game, or at least have their league starter be powerful enough to clear all the content when they put in enough investment. So if you're a one character per league type of player, I would say Spark is S tier for a league start. How is Spark affected by the 3.19 patch nerfs? Hardcore variants popularized by Zizarin, Garatha, Lily, etc., those have been nerfed via spell suppression nerfs on gear. Now it's quite a lot harder to cap your spell suppression solely on your gear. They have found ways to still cap it. It's not that big of a nerf. For my softcore build, this isn't a nerf at all because I have never used spell suppression on gear. The reason I don't go spell suppression in softcore is because spell block I find is easier to get on league start because you don't have to craft it on every single piece of your gear. In fact, you don't craft it on any pieces of gear at all. You just get Tempest Shield and some passives on the passive tree. And the second reason I don't go spell suppression is because you sort of have to choose, do you want to go spell suppression or do you want to go an influenced 8-link body armor? And in softcore, I want to get the extra damage every single time. The second nerf from the Lake of Kalandra expansion is the mana reservation efficiency talent. Now, losing that 15% mana reservation efficiency definitely hurts Spark, although I wouldn't really consider this a Spark nerf because this nerf literally hurts every single build in the game, and it's something we just adjust by dropping Defiant Spanner. So that's something we're going to have to deal with, and every single other league starter will have to deal with that as well. The third nerf is the one that hurts our softcore Spark variant the most, and that is the Gravicious body armor nerf. And my PoE has already made an adjustment that more than compensates for this nerf, which is to allocate Corrupted Soul. However, this will cost a bit of investment, so it will hurt us in the earlier portion of the league. Now I think I have to talk a bit about the build's downsides because I think it's highly irresponsible to simply ignore them when doing a league start video. Spark's main drawback is its relative weakness at doing endgame bosses such as Maven, Uber Elder with low investment in gear. Now, if you're not a beginner, this might not be an issue for you, but if you are a beginner, I would recommend potentially considering some of the services that people offer as boss killers, where you can tip them an amount of currency and they will come in and kill the boss for you. And this is important at League Start because it will give you your void stones that drop the first time you kill each of those bosses, which lets you get more out of your maps. And as a Spark player, and really just as any League Start player in general, you're going to be spending 95 to 99% of your time mapping and a very small amount of your time bossing. And that's why I recommend a Spark Leaguestart, because you want to specialize in mapping, which is what you're almost always going to be doing. And I think this is even more important in recent leagues because GGG has let us sell every single boss that we earn through a key fragment, which means if you can't do those bosses for whatever reason, you can just buy 4 carries to get each of the void stones once, and then you can sell the rest of your bosses, and they sell for basically what the drops on average are worth. So you're not really losing money by not running bosses more than once. And that means we will be powering through our maps super fast while all those trappers and melee builds and totems are just slogging through their maps so slowly, which is very satisfying. And that is the reason why I have been league starting Spark every league in recent leagues. Here we have the path of building, which you can get yourself in the description of the YouTube video. And this is the key to breezing through the first week of the league. Down here, we have 5 different passive trees. Each one of them represents approximately when you should think about doing the next level of lab. So for example, right here, this is the beginning of the game. You're going to want to path through all these damage nodes. The most important thing to note here is we want to grab Elemental Overload. We want to grab the Lightning Mastery, lightning damage with non-critical strikes is lucky, because this adds a ton of damage to our build. Once we grab all of this, pop into normal lab, and then we allocate, as you can see over here, Sanctuary. Now we'll go down to the second template, expands our passive tree, and as you can see, we grab Pious Path after we finished all of this. The third template is going to be approximately where your passive tree is going to look like when you're right about to face the final boss of the axe. You might want to consider popping into Merc Lab and grabbing Righteous Providence, because after you kill Katava, your resistances get worse, and it also makes lab a little bit harder because of that. So after you've completed all of this, you're into maps. The main thing to note here is that we're actually unspecking Elemental Overload, and we're also unspecking this Lightning Mastery. What we want to respec instead is crit nodes down here and some more crit out here, because this is where we're swapping off of Elemental Overload, which is a non-crit build, into Critical Strike build. It'll take us basically to like, what is this, like level 90 plus, and that's really the scope of this video. I do have a final tree here. I took my character from last league and I made some adjustments due to the nerfs to Spark. And this is what I think a solid end game softcore trade Spark should look like. So you can use this for ideas, although this is really beyond the scope of this video. I'll probably make a deep dive in week 1 of the league that will cover this sort of stuff. I also have deep dives from past leagues that are totally applicable, and yeah, again, beyond the scope of this video, so we're not going to be going into this. So now that we've got the passive tree covered, I want to look at these notes, because these are pretty detailed notes I made, and this is really the good information that you guys need. Right up here, we have some crafting information, and you don't want to ignore this, because this is very, very simple craft, and it will make your leveling experience easier. So we have a craft at level 8, a craft at level 14, and a craft at level 20. Like, if you're lazy, maybe you can skip like 1 or 2 of these, but make sure you do the level 20 craft eventually. The craft is you take 1 magic scepter, and if you can't find one on the ground, you can just buy one from one of the vendors. Preferably you want to get one with the right colors, right? Like blue, blue, green, because that's what our links look like. So you take that magic scepter, you take 1 alteration, and you take a white topaz ring, and you just sell them all to a vendor, and they'll give you back a scepter with some flat damage on it. And the level 14 craft means your character needs to be level 14 to hold that weapon, and the level 21 means your character needs to be level 20. The craft, the only thing that changes is the topaz ring. You need white for level 8, then magic topaz ring and a rare topaz ring. If you can't find a topaz ring, I have a 4th craft down here, simply how to craft your own topaz ring, which is an iron ring plus any green skill gem. You just sell that to a vendor. And if you don't have a rare topaz ring, that would be a good use of, say, an essence monster that you killed in Act 1 or 2. Those essences aren't very useful. Just throw it on the topaz ring, make it rare, and then use it in your recipe. So Act 1, now this is a little bit weird, but you need to start on a ranger, because ranger, when you're pathing towards town, you're going to open a chest and it's going to drop pierce support. And the thing is, Templar can't buy pierce support from vendors. It's locked out. So you have to grab it from a ranger, kill Hillock, go into town, put the pierce support in your stash, and then you can just delete the character and create your actual Spark character on the Templar class. Once you get into town, you'll immediately have your 2-link because you'll have the pierce that you muled over from that ranger. So here, going down through the rest of the document, we have the skill gems you're going to want to pick up in Act 1 through Act 7. And then we just have, like, once you get to maps, you might want to look at this, because this is like sort of a general template of what your links should look like once you start entering maps. And this yellow text that you can see throughout is just to kind of make sure you know what you should be using these skills for. For example, in Act 1, we have Frostbomb and Onslaught. I say cast this into packs, and then you just Frostblink through them. The Frostbomb does damage, the Frostblink does damage, the pack dies, and the Onslaught gives you move speed. So in Act 1, you might not need to cast Spark on random trash mobs because this is faster. Flame Wall, if you drop it under a boss, it does damage, but it also does an extra stage of damage with regards to your Spark Bolts, because as your Spark Bolts pass through the Flame Wall, they get ignited, which increases their damage as well. So this is a good skill you could use, just a 1-link. Holy Flame Totem, something else you can just drop for bosses. And if you're having mana issues, you can pick up a Clarity for your aura. For Act 2, the main thing to note is you want to help Illyria because it gives you mana resistance, it gives you mana regen and Ellie resistance. There we go. Now, here we're going to be picking up Leap Slam and faster attacks, and this is why we're using scepters up here, because you can't Leap Slam with wands. So Leap Slam faster attack is really fast. That's how we're going to be getting around. There's no cooldown on that. Frostblink has a cooldown. You're going to want to drop your added lightning for faster casting. In Act 2, we can also pick up the 2 heralds. In Act 3, the main thing to note is you want to do the side quest for the library, because this will give us our eventual 4th link of inspiration support. It will also let us use Orbistorm's Ice Bite Ellie Proliferation. Now, this is something you just drop down and you stand inside of it and you just cast your Spark, and it will give us frenzy charges. It might freeze or chill the enemies. Sniper's Mark is another just one link skill. You cast it on a boss, they take more damage. Determination is an aura we can use, but then we have to drop one of the heralds, so just take your pick. Act 4, nothing changes. Act 5, there is a quest that will reward us with a unique jewel. You should take Poacher's Aim. Poacher's Aim gives us +1 pierce, and you can socket that into your jewel slot, which lets you drop pierce support for Lightning Pen, which is a lot of good boss damage. And Act 5 also gives us Sigil of Power, which is similar to Orb of Storms, in that you drop the Orb of Storms, you drop the Sigil of Power, and then you start casting Spark. And if at any point in time you don't have enough links for all of this, like, feel free to drop this early stuff. You don't need this anymore. You don't really need these anymore either. Act 6, I do have a note here. Make sure your resistances are fully capped, because the game starts getting hard here. You will want to teleport to your hideout, most likely, and just use the crafting bench on every single piece of your gear to add resistances until you have 75 fire res, 75 cold res, 75 lightning res. Don't worry about chaos res. Act 6, we also pick up Tornado, which is a lot of damage on bosses. The way Tornado works is, for the first half of its duration, it will absorb our Spark Bolts that just happen to bounce into it. Then for the second half of its duration, it snapshots the damage onto the boss. For Act 7, you can pick up Zealotry and drop your other Herald. That is the end of the leveling progression for your gems. I do have a note down here on a wand plus shield swap. As you're leveling through the game, you still want to be looking at spell shields, and you want to try and find one that has some combination of the following mods. +1 to lightning skill gems, spell damage, critical strike chance, lightning damage, spell block, just some useful stuff, maybe life, resistance, and just put that in your stash. And once you finish through the acts and you get to maps, you're going to want to start thinking about switching to shield charge with faster attacks instead of leap slam with faster attacks. And then you're going to use flame dash instead of frost blink. Down here at the bottom is just an example of what you should probably have for your gem setups once you enter into maps. So, maybe you just missed something up here. Now, once you reach maps, you can just take a look down here, make sure you have all these gems. There is Tempest Shield down here. I didn't have that during the leveling. I think Tempest Shield becomes more important once you get into maps. For the items here, these are all pretty basic items. This is like what you'd have day one. These scepters are from the craft up here. It's just the flat damage dispels. For the helmet, it does have the special crafted mod triggers socketed spells when you focus with a 0.25 second cooldown. Now you can only get this through June missions by unveiling it. And this is important because eventually, once we get into maps, we're going to want to have Sigil of Power, Tornado, as well as Frost Shield. Actually, I'll just write that in right here. I didn't write that yet. That's like a trifecta of skills that you're going to want to have socketed in the helmet, because the helmet will give you a button called Focus, which just casts everything in the helmet with one button. So then you're casting these 3 buffs with one button, which is really handy to do. It also has the helmet also has 30% increased projectile speed. Now, you don't need to have this day one, obviously. It's just the helmet enchant I think is the best, so it's the one you should be aiming for. Body armor, nothing special on there. There is some strength and dexterity on these other pieces of gear, because once you get into the final stage of the tree, you're going to notice that we take off elemental overload, and then we spec into crit nodes, because elemental overload blocks crit. Well, the way our ascendancy works is you want to have your strength and intelligence both high, because it takes the lowest number and it gives you that much extra critical strike chance. And we get a lot of intelligence on our passive tree, which means for our gear, you're going to want to get some strength on there to bump the strength up to be equal to the intelligence, because that's a lot of extra damage. We also have a Jade Amulet, which represents the fact that we need to get some dexterity on our gear. We need to get around 155, and we don't get a lot on the tree. So you're going to have to find some piece of gear that has dexterity. And if you want some ideas on how to craft flasks, these are approximately what you'd want. Life Flask, Instant Recovery, Corrupting Blood, Enduring Mana Flask. There is reduced mana cost of skills, which you can get. That might be really expensive, so maybe just get the Enduring part. Although you can June unveil from the Unique Flask the reduced mana cost of skills, which you can craft. So if you ever get that unveil from doing Mastermind, you could craft that yourself, and that will be cheap. For a Diamond Flask, increased effect, cast speed is really nice. Again, like for all of these suffixes, they can be on any flask. It doesn't have to be on these specific flasks. Quicksilver, really useful flask. Granite Flask, preferably you get increased armor during the flask effect, because we are stacking armor. I'm going to very quickly touch on Spark's core defenses, because it's important that you understand what each of our defensive layers is doing for us. And these are roughly ordered in terms of importance. Number 1, we have high spell block, and spell block is very important versus bosses and also for generic mapping. Next, we have armor coupled with physical damage reduction. This is mostly important for mapping. And on a league start, we're mostly just going to have the flat armor, and with investment, we will be able to scale into physical damage reduction, and these work together pretty well. The third defense is our ability to freeze and chill. This is just important for everything, but especially important for mapping, because if stuff are chilled or they're frozen, they are much less dangerous. Now, number 4 is our high life ES regeneration, which we get through our Templar Inquisitor Ascendancy. This is useful for bossing and for mapping. A high regeneration rate does not affect our max hit taken, and I know a lot of people stress that max hit taken is just the end all of defenses. However, no matter what your max hit taken is, if you don't have any regen, you will just die. Whereas with enough regen, you can take a big hit, and then you can take another big hit because you're regenning between the hits. It's just a huge quality of life. I think regen is extremely important as a defense. The 5th defense is attack block. Now, this is useful for mapping. It's basically similar to armor and Fizz damage reduction. Now, we're not going to have as much attack block. We're not trying to scale this, although you just will have it whether you want it or not if you use a shield, and we will likely be using a shield on this build. If we're able to get the chase unique Aegis Aurora, attack block becomes even more useful. So once we get Aegis Aurora, we might want to actually think about scaling attack block higher. The 6th core defense is Cursed Immunity, which we just naturally get by having our Pious Path Ascendancy coupled with Zealotry, as well as Soul of Yugal. You will want to get the Minor Pantheon Soul of Yugal. That gives us 100% Cursed Immunity, and this is useful for mapping. Now that we've covered the passive tree and the leveling, you should be set for your league start, although I will touch over some potential uniques that you could use once you get a bit of currency to improve your build. Call of the Brotherhood, it's good because it converts lightning damage to cold damage, and this is how we get our defense of freeze and chill. There's no downside to this conversion. This is just strictly good. However, if this is expensive, we can actually simply use added cold damage support as our 6th link, and that will sort of accomplish the same thing because our skill tree actually doesn't really scale lightning damage that much. So having flat cold or flat lightning doesn't matter. It's still going to end up being the same amount of damage because we're mostly scaling spell damage. That is just a neat little trick to get freezes on enemies without having to get a unique ring that might potentially be expensive. So don't pay too much for this ring. You can get around it fairly easily. But we will want to have this ring in our end game, like final build, most likely. Another option for an early game unique would be the Magnate belt. This has pretty good stats for us. It has strength, which is useful. It has a lot of resistance, and it gives us 10% more damage if we have 200 strength, which we will basically automatically have. If you don't have 200 strength, get a little bit of strength on your gear. You want to have more than 200 strength for this build. So we should be having that enough for that. As for having 400 strength, I don't think that's too realistic. I wouldn't even be aiming to get 400 strength, but that would increase your damage up to 20% more damage. Still, it's pretty good even without the 400 strength. Replica Conqueror's efficiency, the skill effect duration is decent, and reducing the mana cost is quite helpful early in the game if you're having mana issues. This can be expensive early, and it is simply quality of life, so it's not an important unique to pick up. But I want to mention it as an option. Doriani's Invitation Heavy Belt. Now this belt gives us lifesteal. It's probably going to be pretty cheap. I would guess it's going to be between 1 and 5C. It is an option. I generally skip it. Lifesteal is good. You can get it through several ways. You can get it on a rare ring. You can get it on a cluster. There's several ways to get lifesteal. If you do end up going for this for lifesteal, make sure it is the lightning damage leech variant, because there are a bunch of belts with the same name, but they give you a different element for your lifesteal. This is the most interesting to me, Thunderfist Murder Mitts, and this gives us level 30 added lightning damage, which is basically, it's a little bit more than 2 links. So this is a 6 link right there. It also gives us 100% increased effect of shock, which will give us even more damage. So what you should be thinking is, ask yourself, is this glove cheaper than a good 6 link? And if yes, then this is a pretty good option to be putting your Spark in. It's a lot more damage than the 5 link. It is a little bit stronger than the 6 link. However, we are going to be wanting to go for the influenced 8 link body armor. So it is not more powerful than that. So this is not like your end game Spark glove, but it is really good if this for some reason happens to be cheap. I don't know if this is going to be cheap because it seems pretty powerful. Okay, on to chase uniques. You probably won't be able to get these in the first week, but I want to mention them just so you guys can have some sort of goals going into the league. Aegis Aurora Champion Kite Shield. This is likely going to be very expensive. It was quite expensive last league, and I think Chris Wilson said uniques are going to be more rare than in the past, so I have no idea what to expect for the cost of this shield. It is only useful if you have an energy shield pool. I'd say you need to have at least 1000 energy shield, and this is a chase unique. Like, don't expect to get it in the first week. It also wants to have a lot of block, but we are getting a lot of spell block, and the shield does give us some attack block, so you shouldn't have to worry too much about the block. You will have it once you have the shield. Now, Glorious Vanity, this is a second chase unique, and you want to get the one that says Sacrificed in the Name of Doriani, because this gives us the Keystone Corrupted Soul. It has good synergy with Aegis Aurora because it gives us a ton of energy shield, and it has good synergy with our Pious Path Ascendancy because Pious Path gives us energy shield regen and HP regen. And what Corrupted Soul does is it gives us a bunch of ES based on our life pool, but it also lets half the damage go through the energy shield onto your life, which means we're taking damage to our energy shield and life at the same time. So we're getting like twice the regen, which is huge. Now, these are generally pretty expensive in the first week, and then they go down in price. So just keep in mind, the longer you put this off, the cheaper you will get it for. All right, on to the last chase unique. These are the Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh jewels that allocate Conviction of Power. This gives us 4 permanent power charges and 4 permanent endurance charges. The endurance charges are what give us the fizz damage reduction. This is very, very good defensively for mapping. The power charges give us a lot of critical strike chance, which helps us drop increased critical strike support for a pure damage support. So these are great to get, and I have no idea what they'll cost. We're going to wrap up this video with a really quick explanation of Spark DPS and how to understand how much damage you're doing. The reality is you will never know exactly how much damage you're doing because of how Spark works. It just bounces around randomly. You don't know how many times you're hitting the boss. You can just have a best guess. Now, the lower bounds of damage is going to be your total DPS number, and it's very unlikely that you're actually going to be hitting that low of amount of damage. It's going to be somewhere between the lower bounds and the theoretical maximum. To understand theoretical maximum, you need to understand how Spark works. So every time you self-cast a Spark, it will shoot out a bunch of projectiles, and once one of those projectiles hits the enemy boss, all the other projectiles, including that one, will become inert and they won't do any damage for 0.66 seconds. So even if they bounce, even if you try and shotgun a boss with multiple projectiles, only one of them per cast is hitting the boss. And then after 0.66 seconds, they become active again and they can do damage again. So to calculate the maximum DPS, we need to use our skill effect duration. And skill effect duration is how long the sparks will last before they just disappear. So skill effect duration is gotten through the calculations tab. And if you follow my skill tree, it's going to be the same number I have here, which is 3.2. And when you divide that by 0.66, because that is how often the sparks become active again, you get the number 4.8. So your total DPS is the POB value multiplied by 4.8. However, you can round that down to 4 because you can't actually hit 0.8 of the times. So realistically, your upper bounds is 4. And if you use Replica Conquer Efficiency, I think it'll go up to 5, but like you're never going to hit for 5 times. That's just unrealistic. So you can just assume it's 4. With this knowledge, we can draw some conclusions on how we can either raise the total theoretical maximum DPS or just increase the likelihood that we're hitting at that upper bounds of 4 times our POB DPS. And these are the stats that will do this without actually touching the DPS line. So the first one is increasing our skill effect duration. That just raises the multiplier from 4.8 to like 5 or 6 or just however much you increase skill duration by. The second would be projectile speed. And having higher projectile speed lets us hit closer to the upper bounds of our DPS because the projectiles are just bouncing back towards the boss even faster. So you're more likely to be hitting the boss every 0.66 seconds. The third way is simply positioning. You want to have the boss either close to a wall where the projectiles will bounce back and hit the boss, or you just want to be in a small area where just no matter where the projectiles bounce, they are bouncing back towards the boss. Now this will drastically increase your DPS, and if you have a smallish arena, you can just assume you're hitting 4 times your DPS. The fourth way is Pierce. Now, if you don't have Pierce and a projectile hits the boss, it just disappears. But Pierce just lets you keep all your projectiles, and it is important to have at least 1 or 2 Pierce because you want to have all your projectiles to have the biggest chance of one of them hitting back per cast. So I hope this explains why on my path of building I am going for some Pierce, projectile speed, and skill effect duration, even though if you toggle them off, it doesn't seem like they're affecting our damage. They really are affecting our damage. Well, that wraps up my Spark Leaguestart guide for Lake of Kalandra. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching till the end. And if you'd like some additional resources, here is a playlist of Spark content, and I've culled all of the relevant videos, so everything in here is going to be quite useful for you for 3.19 if you want extra information past the Leaguestart. So we have some PoE trade links on some pretty budget gear that is quite powerful. This may not be week one budget, but it is like relatively budget. I have some videos on past leagues just to see how the character progresses in the first few days. This video here is very important. It teaches you guys how to craft the 8-link DPS body armor by yourself. It is very easy to craft. I would not buy it, I would craft it. We have a more in-depth video on defenses if you want to, because you can stack a lot of layers. I just talked about a few of them, and this really goes into more detail. And I have a deep dive from 2 leagues ago, as well as a deep dive from last league on my character once I really powered him up. And this will give you guys some insight on how to really hit high amounts of DPS with Spark without having to go aura stacking. We have a guide on what are the best Watcher's Eyes to choose from, because there are a ton of different good mods. This will help you pick. It also helps explain your options for the cluster jewels. This video here is an aura stacker, and it's how to use a mage blood with a lot of currency to make a very strong Spark build. It actually is going to be outdated for 3.19, so I will have to update this. It's just an obscene amount of currency to make this. It's just more, you can watch it for fun if you want. There are some bossing guides. Yeah, there used to be more stuff on here, but I really just kind of narrowed it down to the most important stuff. I guess you guys should probably see a pop-up for that. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.